And we're back. All right, so we've talked about photosynthesis, and I've given you a great deal of detail on how photosynthesis works. But there are exceptions. There are quite a few exceptions out there in terms of tweaking photosynthesis to work a particular way in a particular situation for certain plants, adaptations to different environments. And the most important one is hot weather plants. And C3 photosynthesis does have a problem in hot weather. So if you can imagine a bunch of heat coming in, here is the heat waves, these red wiggly lines. The plant's hot. So if your stomata are open so carbon dioxide can come in, well, guess what? Water can get out. Hot leaves dry up, right? If you're in the sun, you're in the desert, hot, dry air, especially when it's hot and dry at the same time, like a desert environment, plants will dry up if they open their stomata in the heat. So what do? They close their stomata. And when they close their stomata to protect the water supply so they don't dry up, the oxygen can't get out, and so oxygen builds up inside the leaf, and the carbon dioxide can't get in. And this leads to what's called photorespiration. Now, instead of normal photosynthesis, oxygen is being consumed, and sugars are being burned to make more carbon dioxide. You're spinning your wheels. You're not efficiently making new glucose. You're like, all right, we're out of carbon dioxide. What are we going to do? We got an excess of oxygen. We'll burn that oxygen with some of the glucose we already made, break that glucose back down into carbon dioxide, and put it back together with photosynthesis. That's not very good. That's not giving you new yields of glucose, a photosynthetic product, to grow the plant. You're kind of at a stalemate. And so some plants can deal with it for a little while. You know, here in the Central Coast area, we do have hot days. And so maybe it's too hot. The lettuce are hot out there in the field because it's, 89 degrees, 93 degrees, whatever. The lettuce shuts down temporarily all of their stomata, and they go into photorespiration. That means plants are growing much slower. And in general, when it gets warmer, the rate of growth goes up and up and up until you hit a certain point. And then the rate of growth actually starts to slow down again once it gets too warm. And that's different for every plant. What is their optimum temperature? Depending on the variety of lettuce, lettuce likes it in the high 70s, low 80s. Starts to get up into the mid to upper 80s, and it starts to slow down or even virtually stop growth if it gets too hot. And you have to take that into consideration when you're making harvest estimates on your plants. When is that head of lettuce going to be ready? If you've had nice, warm, toasty weather, it's going to be ready sooner. But if it's been too cold, it's going to take longer. If it's been too hot, it's going to take longer. Too hot means on those hot days, the plants didn't grow much. So what do plants do that are properly adapted? If photosynthesis doesn't work well for lettuce when it gets too hot, lettuce is not adapted to really hot weather. So what do? They slow down. But some plants are adapted to the hot weather, and they have a special technique to deal with it on a regular basis. And we call this C4 photosynthesis. And just like the name C3 photosynthesis is named because it starts with a 3-carbon chain made from carbon dioxide, C4 photosynthesis, it gets its name because it has a 4-carbon starting material. So carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is initially fixed into a 4-carbon molecule. And that C4 material, the oxaloacetate material, can be stored almost like we store firewood for the winter. You know, we can stack up firewood and use it when we need it. Throw another log on the fire. Well, the C4 material can be made at night when it's cool, when the stomata can open and let carbon dioxide in and make a whole bunch of oxaloacetate and stack it up all night long. And now you've got all this oxaloacetate, and you can use it to generate carbon dioxide to feed into the Calvin cycle. You can just strip carbon dioxides right off of the oxaloacetate that you have made during the cool weather, cool nighttime, I should say, the cool time of day. And now when you need to photosynthesize, when the sun is out, you need the sun to make ATP and NADPH, right? So when the sun's out, you can close your stomata and you got all the carbon dioxide you need inside the leaves already. They're inside the leaves. And carbon dioxide can be generated from this oxaloacetate. You don't have to remember oxaloacetate. That's fine. Just remember it's a carbon-4 method. Now, I described night and day. There's also separation by 2 cells that is actually in the picture here, where the carbon dioxide fixing is occurring in one cells and the Calvin cycle in another. So there's 2 different variations on C4 photosynthesis that we'll get into next. So first are the C4 plants themselves, the ones that are the classic C4 plants. And sugarcane and corn, grasses, many grasses in general, are typical C4 plants. They are well adapted to hotter, drier conditions, and they actually separate by 2 different cells. You have one cell region that deals with carbon fixation, and different cells are dealing with the Calvin cycle. So they're separating these 2 activities in different cells. And I won't get into the detail, but it is more efficient. They can protect their water better doing it that way. But it's not the most extreme example. The most extreme example is the cam plants, things like cacti and pineapples. Because even though C4 is an improvement for protecting water, it doesn't protect the water as well as the strategy for cam plants. They are the kings of water protection, of harsh, dry, hot environment survival. The cam plants get their name from the material that is the basis for the metabolism to create carbon dioxide. And that material is crassulation acid metabolism. Crassulation acid. Again, don't memorize that name for the test. I won't ask it for you on a midterm or final, but I do expect you to know CAM. The CAM plants, the cacti and pineapples, as good examples, actually separate night and day, the way I described initially when I started talking about this C4. So CAM plants are a type of C4, but they are different. They are a unique subset of C4 types of plants called CAM. And so here we see the 2 types of C4 illustrated. The C4 plants themselves, the sugarcane and corn, are separated between different parts of the leaf. The mesophyll cells have the carbon dioxide fixation, the C4 pathway, and the bundle sheath cells are actually doing the Calvin cycle. In the cacti, at night, the C4 pathway is running. At night, they can get their CO2, run their CAM metabolism pathway to generate these C4 molecules. So they stack them up at night, and then during the day, they run the Calvin cycle when they need photons of light in order to generate ATP and NADPH to run the Calvin cycle. They need light to make the ATP and NADPH. Now keep in mind the Calvin cycle isn't directly being run by light. You don't need light for the Calvin cycle. You need light for the ATP and NADPH. And that in turn is needed for the Calvin cycle. All right. So C4 pathway plants separated by space. The CAM plants separated temporally or by time, night and day. Temporally just means by time, 2 different times, night and day activities. And that is it for photosynthesis.